Thank you, everyone, for being here. I'm Matt Alderman, Chief Product Officer at CyberSaint, and today I'm in conversation with Evelyn Anderson, Distinguished Engineer and Chief Technology Officer of IBM Cyber Strategy and Risk. Welcome, Evelyn.
Thank you.
Security teams today aren't struggling with a lack of data. They're struggling to turn it into clear, actionable decisions. At the same time, expectations have shifted. Leaders want to understand real risks, prioritize investments, and the security directly to business outcomes. But most programs are still operating in a very manual, point-in-time way. So what we want to talk about today is how that's changing, how organizations are moving towards more autonomous, data-driven cyber risk programs using AI, automation, and real-time insights. So Evelyn, let's start with, you work for IBM, one of the largest technology providers in the world. What do you see from your clients? Like what kind of trends are you seeing from kind of your global client base?
One of the biggest things that we're seeing is they're recognizing that it's time for them to start driving automation. Everyone is ingesting AI and starting to look at, okay, how do I automate this? How do I accelerate? The funny thing is they're ingesting AI, but then they're thinking about it after the fact of, is it secure? Is the data accurate? And so that's where we come in to help them to, number one, assess their AI models and their data and make sure that they have appropriate governance and controls around it.
So you brought up one of the problems that clients are struggling, which is they jump in with AI first, and then they're like, oh, wait a minute. Do I have the right data? Do I have enough of the right data? Let's talk through some of the problems right around that, because I think one of the biggest challenges, and I brought this up earlier today when I was having some conversations, we're really bad at inventory. We're really bad at understanding what we know. And one of the, I think, things we have to think about when we are trying to build these autonomous programs is we need visibility into all this stuff. Do you see the same thing?
Yes. We're seeing that, unfortunately, it's kind of comical when you talk to clients about just their data inventory, an inventory of their assets. If you ask them, do you have an accurate CMDB, they usually start chuckling. And if you don't know all of your systems in your environment, how are you controlling them?
Right.
And so then the other thing what we keep seeing is the data aggregation layer. Over and over, we still have clients that are using those wonderful spreadsheets. So they're still, performing a lot of their controls analysis manually.
Yeah.
So they're doing all of the analysis via spreadsheets. And most of them that we've talked to, unfortunately, they're spot checking. So if you think about the number of controls, there was an analyst review, I think it was probably about 3 years ago, where they talked about, on average, most companies have around 13 regulations and frameworks that they have to comply with. And you think about NIST. We know NIST has over 1,000 controls by itself.
Right.
And you multiply that by 13. So you can imagine what it would take to manually be able to analyze and assess this. And what we've seen is a lot of companies, the way that they're doing it is they're spot checking. So if you're spot checking, are you really addressing the most critical areas?
Right.
And so that's what we're seeing quite often.
You bring up a couple of really interesting points, right? 13 regulations, 65, 70 different security products, right? You're still doing it manually. A lot of the industry talks about automation, but the way they define automation is workflow.
Yes.
Right? So all we're doing is automating spreadsheets.
Yeah.
What you guys are talking about is not automating spreadsheets. No. It's actually automating data collection and how we use that data to drive your security program.
Yes, that's definitely some of the things that we're doing. We want to go through from the analysis, from establishing your governance, your strategy, being able to detect, respond, and remediate. So we're looking at every aspect of cybersecurity on how we can actually automate.
So let's talk a little bit about how do we start to solve for this? Obviously, we talked about inventory, very important, right? We don't have a data problem. We have a lot of data.
Yes.
However, we don't understand how all that data connects. So do we need to start with just kind of the visibility discussion on how do we start to get visibility into all of our assets and all of our, is that where we start, or?
We actually start even a step further with the strategy. We want to make sure that our strategy is really aligning with the organization's business goals and objectives. We, just starting with saying, okay, we want to look at the workflow side of it. We want to look at our controls. That's great. But if you don't have the proper governance around it, how long will it last? And so we try to look at it from really cradle to grave, from setting up from the highest level, making sure that we have an appropriate communication plan with the leaders, making sure that they understand the program because they usually hold the money string. So, when it comes to financing the deals, we try to start at the highest level from there with the governance, building out the strategy, making sure that it's aligning with the business goals and objectives, and then moving from there.
Got it. And I assume some of that alignment is alignment around the regulatory landscape,
Absolutely.
Right? Because as you guys deal with global clients all around the world, there are so many different regulatory components that have to go into that strategy.
Yes, definitely.
Yeah. So we get the governance in place. Let's talk a little bit about what IBM calls the active governance framework. Kind of that concept of actively governing your environment. Sounds great. It's a little harder, I think, to actually accomplish. So how do we start to tackle that?
Well, the active governance framework is really just a portfolio of services and capabilities that we support. What we're trying to do is making sure that when we're engaging with our clients, as I mentioned, the strategy starting from the beginning and establishing your governance, we're trying to look at every aspect of cyber strategy and risk, looking at it from, okay, let's work with the clients to make sure that what we think you need is really what your goals and objectives are. And then we want to make sure that, you have a clear understanding of all of the applicable controls, regulations, frameworks that are associated with your organization, that you're not playing a guessing game. We also want to make sure that from a risk perspective, that we're really identifying the risks that are the emerging risks that may be associated with your organization that you know about, but also that we establish controls to where we're looking at what's happening across the industry so that we're applying that within your environment. And then we also want to look at, we've identified the policy and regulation controls, but let's make sure that we have a mechanism and process that we're actually testing to review and make sure that you're complying with those. And then where we identify gaps, that we have automated the remediation and mitigation of those.
So let's talk about some of the agentic autonomous capabilities that IBM's really starting to build, right? Really some interesting technology integration points that are allowing you to actually start to build out these autonomous security programs. Starts a little bit with the asset side, right? And I'm going to harp on that a lot because in my 30 years in this space, this is the one big challenge I think a lot of organizations still face is they don't understand what they have. And without that kind of foundational element, none of the rest of this is possible. But let's assume we've got the asset side of this thing figured out, right? Now what do we do, right? Like you guys have built some really interesting technologies. Let's kind of talk through some of those pieces of how they help us get to that broader strategy.
Yeah, we kind of started, I guess the term of eating your own dog food is we really looked at a lot of the internal use cases. What were our own pain points? What were some of the things that we were doing that was very labor intensive? And very manual. So we started at home looking at a lot of the different delivery teams and what were the struggles that they were having and the challenges. And what we came to the conclusion within that space is all of them were struggling with performing some form of an assessment. And so we said, okay, if you're performing an assessment, we started at the foundation level where we're saying, regardless of the type of assessment that you're performing, regardless of the data source, we want to automate that process. Because if you think about like some of our internal use cases that we were looking at, where you had, over 800 people that were doing nothing but performing assessments on a monthly basis. And so we started looking at how do we actually automate that? How do we autonomously go through, analyze the data sources, respond to the assessments, and accelerate that process? And that's really how our Gen AI solution was developed and born, was we started looking at the most labor-intensive tasks first and then building from there.
Yeah, and that's the first integration we tackled together, which was how can we leverage generative AI to actually solve the assessment problem, right? Self-assessment's been around, again, 20 plus years. However, it's not getting us where we need to be. what you guys built was really interesting. The ability to upload policies or your SOC 2 or other documentation, analyze those documents, analyze the frameworks, the assessments that you were trying to do, and actually reason the results.
Yes.
It's a very powerful capability. And I've tested against everything, Evelyn. I've done it against ESG assessments. I've done it against SOC 2s and policy documents. All you have to really do with that capability is upload a document, send it a set of questions and answers, and it just figures it out.
Yes.
That's the beauty of it. So simple.
Yes. Yes, it actually started as a part of a Watson X challenge, where we were challenged to go out and find ways to automate our own problems. And so, and of course, while we're working with it, I'm an inventor, so my mind was thinking, how do we apply this from a commercial perspective?
Right.
And so that's how the solution was built. And we started at home. How do we fix our own problem? Because if we can fix our problems, we can fix any client problem. When you think about our own challenges that we have internally, and that's the approach that we took in going after it.
Yeah. So we've got that integration done. Now we're starting to work on the next one. And what you're building next, I think, is really interesting as well. Having been on the GRC side of the house for a long time, some people will know, I was at Archer for a number of years. My first startup was in the GRC space. One of the big challenges has been around regulatory change control and monitoring for new regulations. You guys are building something pretty interesting there to do that. Talk a little bit about.
It's a secret.
No. Knowledge corpus. Come on.
No, we're building a knowledge corpus, and what we're really trying to do is think a little bit outside of the box. I mean, everyone is looking at, okay, how do I analyze and assess? But if you think back when I mentioned the 13, regulations and frameworks per organization, what we wanted to do was go a step further. We want to be able to say, okay, Mr. Client, you're in this industry and this location in the world. And based on that, we want to give you a full listing of all of the regulations and frameworks and leading practices that are applicable to you. We want to be able to crosswalk and map those regulations and then give you a listing of what you should be complying with versus what you're not. Everyone says, oh, I'm complying with NIST 853. We all know that that's not true.
Right.
They take a subset of that, and that's what they assess themselves against. What we want to do is take a full listing of everything and then assess them against it so that they have a clear picture from their policy perspective on what are the controls you're complying with versus the ones you should be complying with. Are you gold plating anywhere? Do you have more controls in place than what's necessary for your organization? Or are you missing controls? And then we want to build in even more where we're looking at the emerging risks that are coming in. We want to be able to look at any type of updates. So we know that regulations, everyone is coming up with a new regulation or executive directive for AI. When we started working on the project, I was kind of laughing because when I started assessing the different AI directives that were out there, there's 50 states in the US. But when you look at the listing of executive orders, directives, regulations, frameworks that are coming in, within just the US, there's over 400, where they're trying to figure out what controls should be in place for that. What we want to do is take the guesswork out and give you a full listing of everything that is applicable to you. And then from there, start building to say, okay, we want to comply with this, not this. That way you're making a more informed decision for your organization that's applicable, that's going to help you to address your controls.
Now I have my super set of controls,
yes,
which, trust me, has not been easy to accomplish, right? Even with crosswalking capabilities, which we do, the ability to create kind of the super set of controls that are aligned to all your regulations is not, it's not super easy to do. But now that gives me the foundation. So that's great. Now we integrate that with our policies, so all of our policies are covered. Because in my early days of consulting, because I was a consultant at one time before I started building product, that was one of the first assessments we did. We looked at your policy to your regulations to see what your policy said versus what you need to comply to.
Yeah, I had the spreadsheet too.
Yeah. Well, because remember, the auditor is going to look at your policy to see if everything's in place. Well, if you're not regulatory bound to it, why is it in your policy? Because you just opened up your audit scope. Anyways, so we tie that in. That's great from a controlled design perspective, right? How do we measure effectiveness of those controls?
And that's where the beauty of what our relationship with you guys and where you already have a lot of the APIs that are already built out. IBM also just purchased Langflow, where you can automate creating APIs even faster. And so the biggest challenge that we saw with a lot of clients was around data aggregation. How do you actually get that telemetry from the system in an automated fashion, so you're not doing the spreadsheets, into your solution and actually assess and analyze to verify and validate that you actually are complying with what you said you're complying with. And that's where the data aggregation comes in. That's where the automation comes in with the APIs. And I think this is one of those areas when you look at GRC space, there hasn't been a lot of new technological advancements within this area. And so we're finally seeing that. And I think this is where I love our partnership, to where I think we're going to make a huge difference within the market.
Having built a system like this and tried to fix a system like that, the challenge with the legacy GRC vendors is they never built an architecture to scale to literally tens of millions of these telemetry data points, right? So you had to kind of rethink the problem to solve it correctly. So yes, your capabilities tied with ours and the ability to bring all that telemetry in at scale now allows us to get to the concept of continuous control monitoring that we've all been striving to for 20 plus years.
Yes.
We're there now.
Yes.
We definitely are there.
Yes, definitely.
Yeah. Some of the other things we're doing, which I think is also interesting as we expand this partnership, will be data enrichment. This concept of the intelligence layer, right? Where, all right, so we've got a lot of telemetry from your different systems. We understand your control state. We understand your risk posture. How can we now use that data to enrich other parts of the security use case environment, right? Like there are other areas where we can leverage this data to actually do some things better.
Yeah, one of the things that we will be showcasing over the next couple of months is really exactly that, where we're able to have an event. It could be a threat, it could be DLP, it could be, vulnerability, whatever the case may be, that comes into where we're able to actually say, okay, there's this threat, but let's go a little bit further. Let's understand what are the actual controls that are supposed to be in place versus those that are in place, and then what's your current risk? And let's overlay that so we can update our risks with, based on that particular event, as well as sending that information back to the source so that they can perform further analysis and understand how this is really impacting their overarching risk exposure. And so these are some of the things that we will be showcasing together. So looking forward to it. I think it's really telling a much more powerful story than what we've had in the past. So whether it's an identity, event or threat management, this is where we're going to be able to show that, hey, we're giving you a full picture and how this is really impacting your risk as a whole versus, here's just a small portion of it.
Yeah, we said it at the beginning, it's that context, right? And I think the ability to enrich these events and these vulnerabilities and these other activities with actual control posture and an understanding of risk. The big thing that has happened on the detection side of the house is, look, we understand the impact to likelihood.
Yes.
Right? We see these events. That changes our likelihood impact. But we need the impact side of the equation. The impact side of the equation has been the hardest part to tie into some of that. Well, we know a lot of that impact because we understand the business criticality of these assets. And so when we can tie those events from a likelihood with the impact of the data that we have, now we can start to make some really interesting decisions about what is the potential impact for an event.
Yes, and that's the key, because in the past we really didn't have the real data to help the executives make the proper decisions on what they should fix versus those things that they should just say, okay, we're going to mitigate this or accept the risk. And now with the story that we're telling, we're able to actually give them data that's really going to help them and influence their decision. So it's a new era.
Yeah, it's all about the business outcomes, right? We've been talking about it internally for a long time as we have to drive better outcomes. And better outcomes are, how do we align these different events and activities to make better decisions to actually drive the business forward? And in a true autonomous security program means that we can move faster because we have the data in front of us to understand where our potential risks are. We know how to navigate those, and we can continue to drive the business forward.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely.
I think the big takeaway is this. This isn't just about more automation. It's about a different way of operating. When you connect data, controls, and risks in real time, you move from chasing assessments to continuously understanding and managing exposure, and that leads to better, faster decisions. And the good news is this: it's already happening. Thank you again for joining us.